yield to any questions.
The gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a motion.
Gentleman has one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are some members of this side who would like to vote on the remaining block in sub-blocks. And so I would move that we handle amendments 1, 2, 4, 5, 18, 19, 20, 21, 33, and 34 in the first block. We handle Amendment 17 in the second block. We handle Amendments 22, 23, 27, 28, 35, and 36 in the third block. Amendment 40 in the fourth block. Amendments 41 and 42 in the fifth block. Amendments 44, 45, and 46 in the sixth block. And finally, Amendments 6 and 7 in the seventh block. And these blocks are all grouping amendments by topic.
It can take the clerk a moment or two to set that up. Gentleman Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to her motion to sever.
Gentleman, proceed. Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, and those people who are watching maybe on television and trying to figure out what's going on here. That only happens in Charlottesville. It's my wife who's watching now, so hello. Anyway, this could be very confusing for a lot of us, but I think all the members should know that the majority party and minority party have been spending a lot of time together over the last few days trying to come up with a procedure that allows these amendments to come forward. And if you recall, well, if we had done this on Wednesday, what we would have been doing is similar to what we're doing today, except we would have had recorded votes on all these amendments. And I think that what we're trying to do now is simply give people on this side of the aisle the opportunity to record their votes in favor of these amendments. The majority party knows that we were going to pull these out of the block. I don't think it surprises anybody that that's what we're going to do. And I hope that we're not going to have long debates about this, but this is how we would have proceeded on Wednesday, and that's what I think our intention. And some people might want to vote differently on each one of these amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman Shannon.
Speaking to the motion.
Gentleman has floor.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to add to what the gentleman from Charlottesville said. Of course, we could have brought this once we declared the amendments to be non-specific and severable, we could have presented a floor substitute that would have reflected all the things we were thinking about rejecting as not being in there, all the things we were going to accept being in there, and then fixing the one change that the governor needed fixed. So I appreciate the gentleman alerting everyone that we've been working on this in bipartisan fashion. I just also wanted to mention that we could have done this very differently, but instead we thought it was only fair to the process and to the governor to present these matters as floor amendments and take them up in the manner that we have, as we would have had they been governor's amendments. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman Shannon.
Speaking further to the motion.
Gentleman has floor.
Mr. Speaker, so I'll just save us some time. Eventually, I'm going to have to recognize the fact that I forgot to explain one of these things. One of the set of amendments that the gentlewoman has now tried to put into a separate block, a sub-block, was the issue relating to amendments 22, 23, 27, 28, 35, and 36. And the body may recall that last year, when we established who the prohibited parties were or who the trigger parties were, that being that these gift limitations apply to lobbyist principals, meaning the people the lobbyists work for, and those who have or are seeking a state contract. That was where we were sort of trying to solve what everyone is calling the Johnny Williams problem. Now, Mr. Speaker, the problem with that is we will never, ever, ever fix all of the possible ways that you could theoretically try to say that somebody is or isn't going to be included. It'll just never happen. We'll never get that perfect. We try to get as close to that as possible. But something that came up during the course of this session, again, that passed our subcommittee in the House unanimously in bipartisan fashion was this issue of taking out the language that the governor is now trying to reinsert. So in the bill, we recognized in subcommittee that the executive branch has contracts with people, that the state does, and it's the executive branch that negotiates those contracts and has power over those contracts. Local governments engage in contractual relationships with people, and the people who serve on those local government bodies are privy to those contracts. The legislature of Virginia does not engage in contracts with anybody. And so it occurred to us that you could easily create a trap for the unwary by making legislators subject to a provision that has no bearing upon them or their duties. Now, obviously, Johnny Williams, if he was a lobbyist or had a lobbyist, if he wanted a bill changed or if he wanted a change to the law, or if anyone else does who's a lobbyist or somebody the lobbyist works for, they have to deal with legislators, and we should be subject to caps and limitations as it relates to those parties. But as far as folks engaged in contractual relationships, we don't know who they are. We don't deal with them. We're not privy to those contracts. Yet we could unwittingly, and I think we were talking earlier, the gentleman from Fairfax, he knows a guy who pushes snow for the state. He's got a contract with the state, and he's a friend of his. And so what does that mean for him? And what does that mean for all the rest of us who may not know that a friend of ours has a contract with the state similarly? So for that reason, we think that the change we originally made during session is good. Again, it is not anybody in here trying to be less ethical. It is trying to be fair to those of us in public policy or in public service. We don't deal with people over their contracts. The executive branch does. The same limitation should not apply to us as it does to them. So that's why that's why we took it out originally. That's why we're asking you to reject the governor's amendment. And I wonder if I talked long enough to get the clerk queued up. Okay. No, you're still going? Okay. So another thing, Mr. Speaker, that concerns me. That's all I have right now, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
We have, let's do these in orders of the blocks. In the first block, we have amendments 1, 2, 4, 5, 18, 19, 20, 21, 33, and 34. And the gentleman moves that we
reject those amendments.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Speaking to the block.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you recall, these are the amendments that deal with certain types of travel that, when it left the House, were excluded from when it left the General Assembly, were excluded from the definition of a gift, and the governor has put back. There has been some confusion created, I think, by our local elected officials, but their confusion really is focused on the wrong thing. And here's the problem. What the local elected officials are saying is they don't want to have to disclose certain travel that local government pays for. That begs the question, why are they not reporting it today? Today, and under the law as it was before we amended it last year, anything of value given to someone covered by the Conflict of Interest Act had to be disclosed unless it fell within an exception. So if they weren't reporting it, there was an existing exception it fell under, most likely the one that says you don't have to report gifts given to you by your employer as part of your occupation. That did not change. We did not change that. What we did say was there are certain types of travel above $100, since there is a $100 cap, there's certain type of travel you should not have to get pre-approved by the council. And we put this language in, inartfully removing it from the definition of a gift. We intended that that travel, even though you could do it, should still be disclosed because you are traveling on public dollars, and the public has a right to know that you're doing it if it fits the definition of a gift to begin with. So the governor has removed language that has not taken effect yet from saying it's still a gift, but you don't have to get it pre-approved. But again, the localities think that what the governor has done is taken away an exemption they already have. He hasn't. Legislative Services that wrote the bill says he hasn't. And all we're doing here now is saying anytime you have travel that fits in one of those categories, which used to be a gift, unless it fell in an exception, now is never a gift and never has to be disclosed. And that is not what we intended. And I think that takes us a little bit of step back, and I ask that we accept the amendments.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to the gentlewoman from Richmond, I believe she is mistaken. So the premise of the start of her argument was that if they are subject to disclosure, why wouldn't they be disclosing it now? You may recall previously there was a tangible and intangible gift distinction. So none of this mattered because all that kind of travel was an intangible gift and was in a totally different category. The problem now is with the change in the law, a lot of these localities have told us we are subject to this because our locality has a lobbyist. So Fairfax County has a lobbyist. They lobby the General Assembly. They're registered to do so. Numerous other counties and towns and cities around the Commonwealth lobby the General Assembly with registered lobbyists. Therefore, they fall under the prohibited parties or the parties not prohibited, but it invokes the lobbyist principle language. So a bunch of these localities would find themselves having to report run-of-the-mill travel that their members, their councilmen, their supervisors, school board members, whoever it may be, that those folks are taking pursuant to their job, also all of a sudden would be subject to all these limitations, requests, everything else. When we were looking at it, we said, wait a minute, if you're doing your job, if you're going to the Chesapeake Bay Commission as part of your job in the legislature, if you're a town councilman doing part of your job, and by the way, all of the expenditures of all these towns are subject to FOIA and everything else so that folks can already look and see what they're spending their money on, but you shouldn't have to engage in all this getting your travel approved. Are we really going to have town councilmen have to call and submit a request to go to a thing that their duties with their town council requires? No, I don't think that's what any of us intended. Again, you're going to drive people out of public service if we do that. And what effectively the governor has done by lumping them into this amendment, and again, if there's something he was trying to do here, he could have done it without pulling in the local officials. He could have done it without pulling in things that are directly related to our jobs or people in the administration, in the executive branch. So the fact that he, again, painted such a broad brush leaves us really, if we want to not mess up everything for everybody else, leaves us with no choice but to reject this amendment. Mr. Speaker, am I correct that we cannot sever out these amendments, or we could not have done that were they governor's amendments, that we would have just been stuck with that? Right. So we believe, Mr. Speaker, that we, again, in the vein of treating this the same as we would have the governor's amendments, that this is problematic, and we simply have to reject this, or we're going to have a lot of problems.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Richmond City.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Gentleman yield.
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, isn't it true that the distinction between tangible and intangible gifts only mattered because tangible gifts were subject to a cap and intangible gifts were not?
That's correct.
Further question, Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman yield.
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
But intangible gifts still were gifts that had to be disclosed if they were above $50. Is that correct?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the gentlewoman, but any notion that me borrowing the town car to drive to a town event in another city was a gift, I think is wrong. And if that's the gentlewoman's contention, I respectfully disagree with that.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I think the gentleman from Shenandoah misses the point. Borrowing the county town car 3 years ago was not a gift. When we changed the law last year to divide gifts into tangible and intangible, it still wasn't a gift. Now that we have gotten rid of that distinction, it's still not a gift. All we have done here is said, if it was a gift 3 years ago, and it was a gift last year, it's still a gift this year. It is subject to a cap. You can do it if it falls in one of these categories. And for that reason, I ask that we just accept, by not accepting this amendment, what you are allowing is any government travel not only is never subject to a cap, but is never disclosed. And that is a step backwards from what the law was last year and 3 years ago. And I don't think that is what we should be doing. These are public dollars. The public has a right to know how they are being spent. Thank you.
Gentleman's response, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to point out, despite what the gentle lady said, is that any travel by a local official or even us, whether it's reported on the conflict of interest form or not, any local travel paid for by the taxpayers is FOIable and is part of the public record for the locality. So it's not like anything of this thing is being done in secret or information is being kept by the public. The only thing we're debating with these amendments is whether that information will also be recorded on a conflict of interest form. Thank you.
Shall the amendments in Block 1, Amendments 1, 2, 4, 5, 18, 19, 20, 21, 33, and 34 be agreed to? All those in favor will say, no, I'm sorry. Well, we ayes and nays, you're going to do it anyway.
Thought you were heading down that road, Mr. Speaker.
Shall those amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 26, noes 55.
Ayes 26, noes 55. The amendments are rejected. The next block is amendment number 17. Gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, under current law, local officials who make procurement decisions above a certain amount of money are mandated to be subject to the Conflict of Interest Act. And the local authorities can subject others to it. The reason that the governor has added local electoral boards and general registrars to the Conflict of Interest Act is because they do, in fact, make procurement decisions, particularly on voting machines, but not exclusively. And so the question is, why would you subject one group of people making procurement decisions? In some localities, those decisions amount to contracts and very significant amounts of money. Why would you subject them to one set of rules and other procurement officials to a different one, when in fact, a lot of the vendors are spending their resources to try to influence those procurement decisions by whining and dining those officials? And that is the reason for the amendment. I don't think they should be subject to different rules. Just like the Richmond Metropolitan Authority board members have to fill out statement of economic interest, I don't see why the local electoral board shouldn't either. And just as many of our local employees have to fill them out to make procurement decisions, so should the local registrar. And for that reason, I ask that you adopt Amendment 17.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman Shenandoah.
Will the gentlewoman yield for a question?
Gentlewoman yield.
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentlewoman, there's been some confusion about the genesis of this amendment. and the gentlewoman alluded to what we were initially told regarding the reason for it, which had to do with the whining and dining of local registrars and perhaps electoral board members over their choice of voting machines. Is that what the gentlewoman's understanding as I'm just confirming that that's what she heard is the reason for this?
Yes, that is one of them.
Further question, Mr. Speaker.
Will the gentlewoman yield?
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
Mr. Speaker, we have learned in recent days, however, and I wonder if the gentlewoman is likewise aware, that there is an existing and ongoing tension between the administration or someone within the administration, between the administration and these local registrars regarding choice of vendors and the idea that essentially the administration wants all of these local decisions to be to the benefit of one particular voting machine vendor, and so that this, theoretically at least, this amendment is being offered to ensure compliance with the wishes of the administration. Is the gentlewoman aware of any of that tension or drama as I just expressed it?
I have heard secondhand from some folks on your side of the aisle that tension may or may not exist. However, I would say the following. The individual in question is subject to the Conflict of Interest Act and has to report any gifts that they receive, as do many of the administration officials. I believe, I'm not positive, but I believe the State Board of Elections members are subject to the Statement of Economic Interest and have to disclose, fill out Statement of Economic Interest forms. And I do not believe that having to disclose gifts received from vendors or anybody else would influence a decision for local elected officials any more than it would influence the decision for those state officials that have to disclose those same gifts now.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
I thank the gentlewoman. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what game is afoot, if there is one, but I know that this is way more complicated than we originally thought. This seemed like a good thing at first glance, but I think after learning a little bit more that I certainly don't want to be part of trying to bend local registrars and their decisions, bend them to the will of someone else over those types of decisions. I understand the gentleman makes a good point. But for those of us who represent rural areas where it's hard to find people to serve, I think if we do this, we are going to ensure that we don't have people, at least competent people, who are willing to serve in these roles. And so I'd ask the body to reject the amendment.
I'm just going to ask everybody, we're going to take recorded votes on the rest of these so we can save us time. Shall the amendment number 17 be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 27, noes 54.
Ayes 27, noes 54. The amendments are rejected. The next block, Block 3, is Amendments 22, 23, 27, 28, 35, 36. Gentleman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very briefly, while it may not be obvious, there are certain members of the legislature who have more power than others and have more influence and have influence on state government and state agencies outside of the legislative branch. I believe the legislative branch does have some contracts. Otherwise, I'm not sure we would be having lunch in the members' lounge. And that was the reason behind this amendment, is so that to the extent those members who have power over contracting decisions, we have transparency, and that I ask you to adopt these amendments. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Gentleman will yield for a question.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Sure.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the gentlewoman being a good soldier. Was I correct earlier in my assertion? I would ask the gentlewoman that we discuss this in subcommittee, that the gentlewoman supported the original change whereby we all agreed that the legislature shouldn't be subject to limitations on things that we had nothing to do with, and that her colleagues likewise agreed unanimously that we should make the change that the governor is now trying to undo?
As part of the negotiating team, I saw where the votes were and where they weren't. made my decision accordingly, but and was convinced at the time of the argument that the legislators, at least I know I don't, do not have authority over spending decisions. However, the more I thought about it, I realized that some legislators are more powerful than others, and this amendment made sense to me.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, speak to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the members to think about where we are now and creating what we don't want to do is create a tripwire for ourselves inadvertently. Right now, the law is, no matter what happens with this amendment, the law is if you go to a lobbyist, maybe you have a lobbyist that you've known since high school, elementary school, and you go to his or her house for a dinner, and you've been friends with them all your life, a pajama party, you go to their house to spend the night, whatever it may be, you have to pay them, and that's okay. That's okay. You pay, and that's what happens. I had a friend who's a lobbyist. I went to her wedding last year, to her wedding reception. Under the law, I had to write her a check to go to her wedding reception. That's the law, and that's not going to change. If you go to your friend's wedding, any of you have a lobbyist that's a friend, even if you grew up with them, you're going to pay to go to their wedding reception. What this amendment is a broad expansion of that. And I ask you to think about it because you're creating an inadvertent trap for yourself. If you go now to a friend's wedding, and that friend is head of a company that has a small government contract to do snow plowing in your area, you better leave. You're going to have to write a check to go to that wedding. If your friend has a contract that you've known all your life, a small contract to do cleaning, and you don't even know about it, you've violated. The lobbyists, we deal with them every day. We know who they are. We know they come to see us every day. That's the law. You're going to have to pay to go to that person's wedding, the wedding reception. But do you really want to create an inadvertent trap for yourself? Let me ask you, does everybody here know every contract, every of your good friend, what they do? Do you know if they have a government contract anywhere? Do you know what if they work in sales and some other division has some small contract with the state? You've violated the law. If you go to their Christmas party in December, you better leave a $20 or a $50 bill under the plate if we pass this amendment. I think the governor's amendments, I applaud what the gentleman from Shenandoah, and I know the gentlelady from Richmond have worked on this hard. I applaud almost all of the work they've done. I ask you to think twice on this amendment because it is an inadvertent trap for any member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
You going to tell us what the value of a pajama party is? If it's under $50, we're okay.
Probably under $50. Mr. Speaker, very briefly, speaking to the amendment. Mr. Speaker, we actually accounted for the situation that the gentleman from Fairfax referenced, and that would still be in place, and that is that notwithstanding any other provision of the law, you can accept a gift from a lobbyist or now someone seeking a contract before the state under certain circumstances, one of which is a personal friendship. And there were provisions put in there looking at the nature and the length of the relationship, whether there is a reciprocal history of giving, whether that person seeks to exempt or deduct the gift they gave you from their taxes. Again, the idea here is not to set traps for the unwary, to say, once you become an elected official, they become a lobbyist or they seek a contract, you can't ever interact with them. But we accounted for that. And this, again, the law says you can't accept it if you cannot knowingly accept a gift from somebody with a contract or seeking a contract. If it's a small contract that you have no reason to know about, you haven't violated anything. Thank you.
Gentleman,
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, I'll keep this brief, but just to amplify on what the gentlelady from Richmond.
Gentleman rise.
I'm speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Sorry, I will keep this brief. Mr. Speaker, as the gentlelady said, there's exceptions for your real friends. If somebody is writing off the dinner they took you to on their taxes as a lobbyist, they're not really your friend. All right? I mean, we have a lot of people when we come down to Richmond. One of the things I learned when I'm really new here, a lot of people want to be my friend all of a sudden. They want to be really good friends. They want to take me out and they want to do all kinds of social things with me. And then all the stuff that they pick up the check for suddenly gets written off on their taxes as a lobbying expense. Kind of reminds me of when I first started paying for my own dinner at restaurants. All of a sudden I thought every waitress there was really kind of into me. And then it turned out that maybe she just wanted a big tip. All right? So I think you need to keep in mind the nature of these relationships. I think we've protected those genuine friendships. But if the language gets taken out that the governor wants to put in, we're creating a loophole that is a mile wide that anybody could drive through, and it really guts the bill.
Mr. Marshall.
Would the gentlelady from Richmond resume the floor for a purpose of a question?
Gentlewoman yield.
Yes.
Gentlewoman yields.
If a contracting officer at a large company answers a request for bid from the state of Virginia, and the CEO of the company doesn't know that but takes you out to dinner, would you be violating the law because that company, that corporation, is in fact seeking a state contract if the amount of the dinner was over a certain amount?
If you knowingly accept or solicit a gift from that CEO, knowing that that company is seeking a contract with the state, yes. If you didn't know, then no.
Further question, Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman yield. Gentlewoman yield.
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
My circumstance here is he said, she said. I really don't track answers to requests for bids. I doubt if anybody here requests or attracts such actions. Aren't we leaving ourselves open for somebody to say, well, you should have known that this company was going to request this, and then you become a point of public discussion when in fact you in all practicality you wouldn't really know that. I mean, aren't we just leaving ourselves open to baseless charges under these circumstances?
I would answer the gentleman that that concern that he just raised would apply to every local, state official other than a legislator. But we put in provisions, safe harbors, if you will, that you had to knowingly violate it. And we also put in a safe harbor that if you have a relationship with that CEO that shows that they are a friend based on the history of your relationship, the extent to which you've known them, if there's a reciprocal history of giving, you haven't violated anything.
Oy vey Maria, Mr. Speaker.
The question is on the adoption of the amendments in Block 3.
Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry.
From Henrico, Mr. Farrell.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentlelady yield for a question?
Yes.
Gentlewoman yield.
I'm not part of any script. I'm generally very confused now because you just said a history of giving. And if anyone looks, and I preface that question, Mr. Speaker, with you can look at my gifts. I don't take them for the very reason it's much easier, it's much simpler to fill out a report when you don't have any report. But you just said if there's no history of giving, so let's just say, let's throw out the wedding scenario again. I'm probably going to give, or I'm married, and hopefully I won't get married again, but if another legislator at some point gets married in the midst of their term, like I did, quite frankly, let's say somebody's going to come, and I don't know, and they gave me a gift, and I say, well, they're a friend. But you said there has to be a history of giving. Let's say there's not a history of giving a reportable amount, but all of a sudden they give me a wedding gift, and I hope they're nice enough where they don't give me the $10 spoon that they give me the whole set of silverware. Can you just walk me through that? Because,
sure.
Again, I just think we're seeing The problem is I'm playing in a game of lawyers who create more hypotheticals than I've ever seen, and I just want to make sure we're actually clear here. I mean, can you walk me through that scenario?
Sure, Mr. Speaker. I think the gentleman from Henrico misses his days on the courts committee, but I will point you to the starts on line 891 if you'd like to look at the exact language. But what we did for lobbyists, if you're a legislator with a lobbyist relationship, or if you are a state or government official with a lobbyist or a relationship with the contractor. So this is going to be the law no matter what. We said that those people could be considered a personal friend, and therefore you could accept a gift over the cap from them. And in determining whether they are a personal friend, the following factors shall be considered. The circumstances under which the gift was offered. Was it a wedding or a baby shower?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
Shall the amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 30, noes 50.
Ayes 30, noes 50. The amendments are rejected. Next block of amendments that we have is amendment number 40 in block 4. The gentleman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Very briefly. Amendment 4 was the governor purposefully did not use the word audit because that is a term of art that would require all the things you traditionally think of as an audit. But what this amendment was intended to do was allow the council to do a random selection, look at the reports to see if they're accurate and complete. This is analogous to a process that they use down the hall where they have a committee of people who sit and look through every single form to make sure, are they complete, do they look accurate? This was never intended to be the council is going to randomly audit people or go check your finances or anything. They're going to look at your report. Is it complete? Does it appear on the face of it accurate? They will have already gotten lobbyist reports, and if a lobbyist reports they gave you a gift and you don't report it, they will tell you there's a discrepancy you might want to fix. This was all intended to happen in the window of time between when you file and when it is published as a sanity check, so that if you need to correct something, you can. But when we talked about doing this in the committee, recognizing, because I think one of the original bills said they do this for every form, but the council wouldn't have the manpower to do every form, and so that's why this is limited to a random audit. A random inspection. This is to protect the filers more than anything, not some gotcha, so that they can be embarrassed later. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, before the gentlewoman sits down.
Stewart.
Sorry. Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman has the floor.
will the gentlewoman yield for a question?
Gentleman yield.
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentlewoman, considering that anybody who has access to an internet connection on the face of the earth will be able to look at these reports and see if they're complete and see if they got filed on time and see if they match what people know about the individual who filed it, is there anything stopping from the council to look at those same things already such that this would be necessary?
Mr. Speaker, if I understand the gentleman's question, he is talking about once the forms are published on the internet. This process is intended to occur before that happens, so that if there is a discrepancy, the filer is given the opportunity to correct it before it is published.
Shall the amendment be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 26, noes 55.
Ayes 26, noes 55. The amendment is rejected. The next block, block 5, is amendments 41 and 42. Gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think here the amendments were intended to be technical and self-explanatory, that the council would have the authority to do its job, and so I hope we would accept the amendments.
Shall the amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 28, noes 53.
Ayes 28, noes 53. The amendment is rejected. Next block is Block 6, Amendments 44, 45, and 46. Gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These amendments were just intended that the council would employ its own staff, including an executive director, but would still give the legislature oversight by making sure that that staff had to be confirmed. And I hope we accept the amendment.
Shall the amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 29, noes 52.
Ayes 29, noes 52. The amendments are rejected. The final block is Block 7, Amendments 6 and 7. Gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. I thought I had this one. This one. These amendments were intended to provide consistency in who is considered a member of your immediate family. And I think the concern down the hall was that by adding child, grandchild, parent, or sibling, they didn't want to do that for purposes of people who are on boards and commissions. We've already done that for every other government official, and the fact is that a lot of these boards and commissions, take the Department of Health or the Board of Health, Board of Education, they are making significant decisions that could, in some cases, just as significant as decisions we make as a legislature, because we are delegating them to work out the details to implement broad policies we put in place. And just as we decided we don't want people making decisions that would directly benefit their children, their grandchildren, their parent or sibling when they pass broad policy decisions, we also don't want those boards and commissions who have to implement them to be treated separately. And so I hope that you would accept the amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Speaking to the amendments. Mr. Speaker, our caucus, I don't believe, was able to discuss this in caucus, and this is something that materialized after discussions with the body down the hall. So I am going to encourage the members to reject these two amendments. The reason for that, as expressed to us, and I don't think it's invalid as a concept, is that the way this is drafted through some nefarious intent, a family member who is disgruntled could conflict out a legislator or someone else against their will from an important vote. And even though I may not have that right, the concern down the hall is sufficient, I believe, and we agree that if this is something that needs addressing, we should come back and do it as a standalone concept and not try to incorporate yet more unintended consequences into this bill at this time. So we committed to them to working on that. Again, this does not become law until January. We have January to work on this particular issue, and so since it's not right, we want to make sure we get it right and ask the body to reject these amendments.
Shall the amendments be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 28, noes 53.
Ayes 28, noes 53. The amendments are rejected. Gentleman Shenandoah.
Speaking to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to recap. I know we just rejected a lot of things. The reasons for that, I think I've already explained. I'm not going to do it again. We want to make sure that we get this right, that they're not traps, and we think we've done that in large part. Mr. Speaker, the big news of the day, though, that we committed to earlier, that we committed to when we met with the governor, when we noticed the error in drafting, was that we were going to do whatever we could to fix the error in drafting and adopt the concept that the governor was proposing, because we thought it was an important concept. And so I just don't want it to be lost on those assembled here today what extraordinary lengths we had to go to, not only our legislature, but especially our staff, to fix the error, to put this in a posture where we could fix it, and to find ourselves where we are now, which is adopting the aggregate $100 cap annually. And so that is what we are left with. We have embodied in this bill now that $100 cap taken to mean an aggregate cap within any calendar year. And that will further, we hope, Mr. Speaker, strengthen the public's trust that we have tried very hard throughout this process to restore. And I do want to thank our staff for being so diligent in getting us to the point where they were able to fix this problem, even though we had to come back. We were certainly, I want to reiterate, Mr. Speaker, we had anticipated this problem and tried to put ourselves in a posture where we could have fixed this Wednesday night. But we sometimes seem to find ourselves in a different posture in terms of our readiness to solve problems in this body, and the other body is not always as prepared. And I think it may be personality driven, whatever it is. They were not ready to go forward, and to their credit, they wanted to be deliberate about it, and we had a little more chance to prepare. But I do want to thank our staff for helping us work through this and helping us solve this problem. And we are, I think, proud to have this finished product and to have adopted the governor's recommendation for the aggregate $100 annual cap. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill pass.
Gentleman, Richard City, Mr. McClellan.
Yes, speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Very briefly, Mr. Speaker, I think I said this when we originally passed the bill, and I'll say it again. This ethics bill is a good example of what we can accomplish when we recognize a problem and set aside partisanship to try to solve it. And while we can and still do disagree on some of the details, we can do so in a way that is civil and that is still trying to get to the right result and not trying to put gotchas in. And so I think from the governor's office on down to on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the Capitol, we've really tried to do that. And I think this is still something that we can take some measure of pride in. I think we all recognize, we heard this hinted at today, this is not the end of the process. And last year, with the bill, we put in place a council whose job it will be to make sure that as we go forward, as new situations arise, as things change, that we are making sure that we give the public assurances that their public officials can be counted on to make decisions based on what is in the Commonwealth's best interest, based on what is good public policy, and not based on what serves their own private interests. That public perception of government took a hit a few years ago with one situation, and then again last summer. And when you put yourself up as a public official, yes, it is a sacrifice. We all recognize it is a personal sacrifice. In some ways, it is a financial sacrifice. But part of the deal, part of the bargain, is you hold the public's trust, that you are going to represent them based on what is in their best interest. And that's what we've been trying to do with this bill. We can probably take some steps to strengthen it in the future, but I hope that we will continue to do that in a cooperative way, the way we've done it, particularly this year. And with that, I hope that we'll pass the bill. Thank you.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Speaking of the bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, you know, as I was sitting through this debate and all of the things that happened over the last few days, thinking about Jerry Garcia, what a long, strange trip it's been. But, you know, it's not really a funny thing. I mean, it is a very serious thing. We have been on a serious trip for a long time here. You know, in the aftermath of what happened several years ago, we've been out there trying to restore the public trust. And when this governor took office, he laid down a marker. That marker was the $100 gift ban. And he challenged us to come together and come up with a good ethics bill. And in fact, very early last session, we got together on a bipartisan set of principles that we were going to use to come up with an ethics bill. And we worked last session and came up with a bill. We recognized that from the beginning that bill wasn't going to be perfect. And the hours and hours that many people spent on that bill, going through line by line the present law, trying to correct that law and make it better, was a great challenge. We produced something. It wasn't the best thing. We knew we were going to have to be back, and we were challenging each other to do better, and the governor was challenging us along the way. It has been a difficult process, but today we are farther along, much farther along than we were before. This language on the gift ban shows how complicated this process is. In fact, I believe we didn't get it right when it came out of the House and the Senate. There were some problems that led some changes into the language in the conference report. It got to the governor's office, and there were some differences of opinion about what we had written in our bill. There was a legal argument to be made that the gift ban was aggregate for a year, and there's a reasonable legal argument to be made that it was over the lifetime of the service. So what did we do? In a bipartisan way, we fixed that problem. The real reason I got up here to support the bill was not so much to support, and I hope you will, but to compliment two folks who really did yeoman's work to do this and are going to be back next year, I'm sure, trying to tweak it again. You're not retiring. The gentleman from Shenandoah, and of course the gentlewoman from Richmond City. You know, they know this thing inside and out, and it was a lawyer's delight to listen to them in their exchanges today. I know you all agree with me with that. So this process is not over. We're going to be back again next year. I'm sure we're going to have some initiatives that hopefully we can embrace in a bipartisan fashion to get some good things done and help continue to restore the public trust. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope we'll support the bill.
Gentleman from Alexandria, Mr. Topeka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rising to speak to the bill or the amendments. 3 points. This isn't perfect, but it's a lot better than it was when it started, and I think we should all support it. Second point. I have learned a lot about leadership by watching the gentleman from Shenandoah and the gentlewoman from Richmond as they've worked on this issue over the last 2 years. When I first got to this chamber, within the first day, the gentleman from Shenandoah said something that made my jaw drop, and I don't remember what it was, but it was over the top, and it was theatrical, and it was bombastic, and it was what we sometimes expect from him. But I would say the way he has conducted himself and the way the gentlewoman from Richmond has conducted herself in this process has really been something we can all look to and emulate and should be proud of because it speaks really well of our institution. My last point, donuts cost way less than $50, so I'll be happy to continue to provide donuts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 81, no 0.
Ayes 81, no 0. The bill is passed.